Hi there, this is Colleen from Keeping the Peace, and welcome back to another episode of Choosing Your First Handgun, 7 Things to Consider. This is episode 3, and we're going to talk about hand fit today. Does the gun fit your hand? A lot of people go to the store, they pick what looks cute or what looks macho. They don't necessarily consider all these different factors, and a lot of times they'll throw down a bunch of money, they'll come home with what looks cool to them, and then they go shoot it. And it's a terrible experience, or it just doesn't fit their hand, or they're shooting terribly and they can't figure out why, and it really is because it doesn't fit their hand. So let's talk about what that means. Generally, the first measurement you want to look for is the distance between this little fleshy part of the Y of your hand, between the thumb and forefinger, and the middle of the first pad of your finger, because that's going to make a big difference on whether or not the gun fits you. You want to stick your hand out like a Y, put the gun in the Y, wrap your fingers around so that they're touching under the trigger guard, okay? And then you want to put your finger on the trigger in the middle of the first pad and see if you can reach that well. If you can reach that without any kind of, flexing your hand around the gun, then that gun is a good fit for you. If you naturally want to put a whole bunch of finger in the trigger guard like that, well, the gun is too small for you. There may be situations where you might choose a gun that's obviously too small for your hand just because you want to tuck it in a little tiny area on your body for concealment. That's a whole different factor. But if you're wanting something to carry as your main carry piece and you want it to fit your hand well, you don't want to naturally have tons of finger falling into that trigger guard, because it's going to cause you to pull the gun side to side. You're going to shoot off to the side. Another thing to consider is the gun too big? I didn't bring a gun today that's too big for me. All my guns that I've chosen fit me well, except this tiny little gun that I sometimes use as a backup, sometimes a backup to a backup. But what it would look like if the gun was too big would be, let's just pretend like this is the face of my trigger, because there are guns that are probably that long. So let's just pretend like that, okay? What I would have to do is cant my wrist around to the side to reach the trigger. And I see a lot of people bring guns to my classes where this is the case. A lot of times it's a lady coming in, they're bringing their husband's gun or a friend's gun or something like that, or maybe they've gone and bought a gun used and they just didn't really know what to look for. And they're having to cant the wrist far around to the side like this to press the trigger. Or again, we're pretending like this is my trigger face, okay? If you have to do this to shoot, your wrist is naturally going to bend under recoil and you are going to shoot a very sideward pattern going toward your support side. So you do not want to have to cant the wrist around to reach the trigger. You want to be able to align the bone structure of your forearm with the gun. You want it in line like so. Generally I don't point guns at the ceiling, but I'm in a big deserted building all by myself, so I guarantee I'm not pointing it at any person up there. But hopefully you can see that. You can see how my hands naturally curl around the grips of the handgun, and I can reach the trigger well. I don't have too much finger hanging out to the side. I don't naturally want to put too much in. It just fits, okay? This particular gun is a Smith & Wesson Shield. This little one here, I carry this a lot. This is a 6-Sauer P938. Fits perfectly for my hand. But again, if the trigger were way out there, I would have to cant my wrist around like this to hit it, okay? Very good. So that's how you find out whether the gun fits your hand. Another thing about hand fit is, does the gun work with the strength that you naturally have in your hands? So an example of this would be if you're someone with what you consider to be very weak hands and you choose a gun with a very long and hard trigger pull, that might not be a good hand fit for you. Because if you're having to struggle just to press the trigger, you're going to cause a lot more shaking. It's going to be just a really negative experience. You're going to fatigue and start to shake because of the fatigue. it's just not going to be a good experience. So if you're someone who has what you consider to be weak hands, then choose something with a lighter trigger and more safety mechanisms rather than a very long hard trigger and no safety. Okay, an example of that would be this little teeny backup or backup to a backup. This is a tiny little Kel-Tec P32. It has a very long and hard trigger like a lot of these tiny little guns do. There are no safety mechanisms there. They're completely relying on your gun safety and a long trigger press. You have to be very deliberate about pressing that trigger. It's not a fun shooting experience in my opinion because it's just too much effort to press the trigger. I prefer a very light trigger. My favorite trigger that I own is on my Springfield EMPs. About 4 pounds, 4.5 pounds. It's just really crisp and nice. I love it. I happen to really like the trigger on the Shield. A lot of people don't like it. They complain about it, but I think it's crisp and nice. I like it. I shoot real well with it. I don't have a problem. I don't particularly like the way the trigger feels on the SIG P938. To me, it's very hard, and there are ridges in the front of the trigger that bite into my finger. I don't particularly like that. I understand why they put ridges, but I don't particularly like that feel. But I can shoot well with it, and it's easy for me to conceal it on my body, and I choose to use it anyway. So sometimes you will choose to compromise on certain ones of these factors. So that's how you find out whether the gun fits your hand. I hope that helps you, and then I'll see you in the next episode. We'll talk about size and weight.